Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. Notes from Underground. By Fyodor Dostoevsky. Notes from Underground is a novella created by Fyodor Dostoevsky in 1864 that is regarded as one of the first existentialist books. It takes the shape of an excerpt from the memoirs of an unknown narrator, dubbed the Underground Man, a former low-ranking civil official living in St. Petersburg. The first section, Underground, is a monologue, The Underground Man's Diary, an attack on the new Western ideology, primarily the revolutionary novel What Is to Be Done? Nikolai Chernyshevsky, a rational egoist, wrote it in 1863. The novella's second section is titled Propos of the Wet Snow, and it details several occurrences that sometimes ruin or renew the underground guy, who plays the first-person, anti-hero, indecisive victim of his society, and untrustworthy narrator. Dostoevsky analyzes the impact of modern life on the personality of this guy on the outskirts of society, which he proceeded to investigate in his following writings. Dostoevsky discovered while imprisoned in Siberia that the Russian undereducated laborers and peasants would associate progressive thinkers with the aristocratic class that used to persecute and limit their freedom. To live in harmony, Dostoevsky believed that the Russian people needed to return to traditional Russian values such as family, religion, personal responsibility, and brotherly love. The Underground Man from Notes from Underground conveys Dostoevsky's beliefs and serves as an example of the kind of difficulties that Russian contemporary society creates. The Underground Man, like Dostoevsky, criticizes rational egoism and dictatorial utopian ideals. He attacks all forms of dogmatism. At the same time, he is a victim of contemporary Russian metropolitan life. Due to a lack of pleasant social contacts, the Underground Man attempts to relate to the world through the codes and examples found in European literature. His incapacity to relate to the world in line with the codes of European literature isolates him even more and drives him deeper underground. The unnamed storyteller of Notes from Underground is a misanthropic and spiteful man who lives alone in St. Petersburg, Russia, in the 1860s. He is a retired Russian civil servant who received an inheritance. The novel is composed of the man's notes, a contradictory and jumbled collection of confessions or memoirs that chronicle and explain his alienation from Russian modern society. Notes from Underground is divided into two sections. The first section, Underground, is shorter than the second, and it takes place in the 1860s. The Underground Man has been alive for 40 years. This section introduces his character and describes his beliefs as well as his negative attitude toward Russian society. The Underground Guy's first words are, a sick man. A terrible man. An unpleasant man. He describes himself as neither a scoundrel nor an honest man, neither a hero nor a bug. He is an intelligent and well-read man who believes that this is the root of his problems. The Underground Man feels that all educated and conscious men in modern society should be as depressed as he is. He's become disillusioned with the entire ideology. He admires the sublime, the romantic concept of beautiful and high, but recognizes how silly it is in the context of his humdrum and petty existence. The Underground Man scorns 19th-century utilitarianism, a school of thought that attempted to connect man's desires with his interests through logical reasoning and mathematical calculations. The Underground Man claims that man's ultimate desire is to use his free will, regardless of whether it is in his best interests or not. When confronted with utilitarianism, man can do unproductive and nasty things simply to demonstrate that you cannot forecast free will, thus it is completely free. This explains why the Underground Man insists on liking his liver pains or toothaches, as a way of mocking modern society, which accepts without questioning the importance of attending a doctor. The Underground Man, on the other hand, is not particularly proud of his fruitless behavior. He despises himself as a person. Can an aware man ever truly respect himself? He asks the reader. He recognizes that inertia has rendered him incapable of being as vicious as a rogue, as insignificant as an insect, or as languid as a real lounger. The Underground Man's abstract notions in the first section are practically shown in the second portion of Notes from Underground, titled Apropos of the Wet Snow. This section illustrates the Underground Man's development from his naive point of view, influenced by the beautiful and lofty in Romanticism, to his more mature point of view in 1860, full of cynicism regarding loftiness, beauty, and, most importantly, literariness. Apropos of the Wet Snow depicts exchanges between the narrator and other characters from his environment, including prostitutes, soldiers, and former schoolmates. The underground man is extremely distanced from these individuals, making it impossible for him to have a regular relationship with them. He regards them with a mix of dread and revulsion, which leads to his humiliation, which leads to self-loathing and sorrow. The underground man's isolation can be apparent in all types of relationships. When he goes on a walk in the park, he becomes obsessed with yielding the right of way to an unknown soldier who was tossed out of the pub for fighting. The underground man walks into the bar, expecting to get into a fight. He deliberately comes in the way of a cop, but the officer pushes him aside without saying anything and without looking at him. He wishes to challenge the officer to a duel, but knows that everyone would laugh at him for speaking about honor in literary Russian. So he returns home and visits the police frequently in St. Petersburg. He writes him a letter but never sends it. He frequently sees the police on a particular street and always moves out of the way when they are about to collide. Following that, he wants to run into the officer but not move out of his way to disobey him. He borrows money from his boss to purchase appropriate attire for their meeting. He tries to walk into the officer but always manages to dodge out of the path at the last second. He ultimately runs into the police, who does not notice the underground man. He believes the cop was merely pretending not to see him and thus feels avenged for everything. But his enjoyment fades quickly, and he escapes his depression by dreaming about everything that was beautiful and exquisite. For 3 months, he thinks that he is a hero, like one of Lord Byron's masterpieces, and that everyone adores him. The protagonist then follows some of his school acquaintances to dinner on purpose, but he is not welcomed. They treat him like some sort of common housefly, thus he swings between publicly criticizing them and desiring their friendship and attention. Later that evening, the underground man attempts to save Liza, a lovely young prostitute, by emotive and passionate talks about the dreadful fate she will face if she continues to sell her body. He tells Liza about a dead prostitute he saw being carried in a casket earlier that day and portrays the dreadful life of a prostitute. They talk about marriage and families, and the underground man advises her to leave the brothel since married life is pure pleasure. He informs her that if she continues her life as a prostitute, she will surely lose everything: beauty, youth, health, and hope, and that she will die and be forgotten. She sobs, and the underground man welcomes her home and provides her with his address. She does not appear for several days, and the underground man criticizes his servant, Apollon, as disobedient and haughty. He attempts to compel Apollon to beg for his wage one day, but he merely stares at the underground man until he cracks and tells Apollon to show him some respect before he gives him his money. When Liza returns to visit the underground man in his shabby apartment some days later, he reacts in rage and embarrassment when he realizes she has reasons to look down on or pity him. During Liza's visit, the underground man continues to taunt her. He tells her that he does not feel sorry for her and wants her to leave him alone. He erupts into frantic cries as she embraces him. When he recovers, the underground man is unable to return her affection and advises her to leave him alone in peace and quiet. When Liza is about to depart, he out of malice slips money into her hand, but she declines. She leaves him in his apartment, confused and heartbroken, and walks away. He chases her and fantasizes about how he would fall down before her, sob with guilt, kiss her feet, and ask her forgiveness, but he no longer pursues her. He tells the readers that he hasn't seen her since and is embarrassed by his notes. The underground man concludes the notes at this point. Dostoevsky argues in a footnote at the end of the work that the underground man failed to make even the simple decision to cease writing because the notes document includes several pages after the point at which he chose to terminate it. The underground man is the main character and anonymous narrator of the novel. He is a former government servant living in 19th-century St. Petersburg who has withdrawn fully to what he refers to as the underground, a kind of total isolation and alienation from society. The protagonist, who is deeply misanthropic, believes that he is more bright and perceptive than others, yet he also despises himself and frequently feels embarrassed or inferior. The novel's characters and events are all told from the underground man's point of view. Liza, a teenage prostitute who the underground man tries to save after having sex with her at the brothel. Despite what she is doing, Liza is innocent and bashful, and her emotional reaction to the underground man's attempt to convince her that she is wrong to have this occupation. She is sweet and nice, yet she is also proud and noble. Simonov, the underground man's former schoolmate, with whom the protagonist still has a relationship. He regards Simonov as independent, honest, and not as narrow-minded as other people. The underground man, on the other hand, feels Simonov disdains him and finds companionship burdensome. Zverkov is Simonov's friend and also Underground Man's former schoolmate. Zverkov is a successful army officer who is well liked by his peers. During their school days, the Underground Man despised Zverkov for being arrogant, vulgar, and ignorant. He is also jealous of Zverkov's confidence, fortune, and fame. Ferfitchkin is another former Underground Man classmate who admires Zverkov. In school, Ferfitchkin was the Underground Man's deadliest opponent. The Underground Man describes him as cowardly, impudent, and ignorant, yet he frequently lends money to Ferfitchkin. Trudel Lyubov, the Underground Man's former schoolmate, whom he runs into at Simonov's residence and during Zverkov's farewell party. He is a good man who respects the Underground Man with respect. Trudel Lyubov, according to the Underground Man, usually treated him as a non-entity. Apollon is the Underground Man's old servant. Apollon stays with him and reluctantly helps him with domestic tasks. The Underground Man believes that Apollon is constantly evaluating him and that he is extremely egotistical. The Underground Man despises Apollon's speech and appearance. Anton Antonich Satochkin is the ministry's department head. Underground Man's best friend is Anton Antonich. He occasionally borrows money from Anton Antonich and pays him a visit on Tuesdays when he wants to socialize. The officer is a military guy who treats the Underground Man with contempt in a tavern one night and vows to exact revenge on him for many years. The Underground Man despises the officer because of his physical prowess, rank, confidence, and wealth, but he also fears him for the same reasons, so he cannot act against him. Fyodor Dostoevsky, born in Moscow in 1821, is regarded as one of the greatest literary psychologists and novelists of all time. His father was a doctor who educated him at home first and then in a boarding school. His father enrolled him in the St. Petersburg Academy of Military Engineering while he was a child, and he graduated in 1843. Dostoevsky resigned from his military job after graduating to devote himself to writing. Poor Folk, 1846, his first work, was immediately praised by critics. Dostoevsky's encounters with social injustice influenced his worldview. Dostoevsky began to participate in socialist circles when he was 26, owing mostly to his hostility to serfdom. His beliefs were profoundly impacted by his childhood experiences. His father was murdered by his serfs when Dostoevsky was in school. Another traumatic experience that deeply affected Dostoevsky and was reflected in his writings was his time in prison. He was imprisoned in April 1849 for belonging to an organization that circulated socialist propaganda. After 8 months in prison, Dostoevsky was sentenced to death and taken to be shot alongside other members of the group. The execution, on the other hand, turned out to be purely a display intended to mentally punish everyone. Following his near-death experience, Dostoevsky spent 4 years in a Siberian labor camp, followed by 4 years in the military. While in prison, he rejected his socialist beliefs and embraced conservative, traditional, and Russian values. This shift in philosophy can be noticed in his following works. Dostoevsky spent the 1860s in Western Europe, studying about European culture, which he believed was interfering with Russian culture. He explores this issue in Notes from Underground. Dostoevsky's years in Europe were challenging because he battled epilepsy, poverty, and a gambling addiction. When Crime and Punishment was released in 1866, he became popular and received critical acclaim, rescuing him from financial ruin. His subsequent novel, The Brothers Karamazov, published in 1880, catapulted him to greater literary acclaim. Dostoevsky established realism in modern fiction with Notes from Underground, 1864, and his succeeding books. Realist writers, Charles Dickens in England, Honoré de Balzac in France, and Dostoevsky and Nikolai Gogol in Russia, among others, examined the novel's entire purpose. Real people, in general poor students, city inhabitants, lowly craftsmen, prostitutes, and other types of characters who had previously been ridiculed or stars of comedic stories, are the subject of realism. Dostoevsky's works, considered the pinnacle of realism, attempt to depict reality in all its complexities. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.